Good morning everyone. Today we will be talking something about research, which is of course very important now. How to research dance? Dance research is an academic discipline, is relatively new. In 1967, the first volume of the Code, Dance Research Annual, wrote, one of the most serious problems in dance research is found in the fact that the literati in the field are not yet the university people. However, today the scene is much changed. The fast growing field of dance research has become an important part of performance studies. Unfortunately, in India, there is not enough work being done and much more is required. What is more important is that the quality of the work produced is uneven. Not everyone can claim to have burned the midnight oil and done as deep research as the most iconic of Indian dance scholars, Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan. As keen students of dance, you must be aware of the fact that there have been many dissertations done on Indian dance in many Indian universities. Some of these universities like Vadodara, Keraghad, Shantiniketan, Rabindra Bharati, etc. have performance studies or dance departments. Often dance oriented research is done in universities under their Sanskrit, Tamil, Indian language, modern Indian languages, literature, history, philosophy, fine arts, psychology and sociology departments. This suggests that there are many ways of entertaining the study and research on dance which enjoys much interactivity with other fields. Some of these studies and researches have also produced books. While it is hard in India to access unpublished theses, books are easier to acquire. Yet even a cursory glance at the books emerging out of such researches are seen to be more descriptive than analytical, more text based rather than practice oriented, and usually located in the comfort zone of the familiar narratives or for familiarization rather than looking at the uncomfortable ground realities that deals with the many pulls and pushes of their social cultural milieu. However, you are a fortunate lot as you are studying when we have so many examples of successful research that is challenging and path breaking. To do such a work, you must remember that it should be different, new and push the boundaries of the discipline. Research work must be original. By original, I mean it should not have been attempted before and it should be born anew from your serious imagination, not frivolous or fanciful imagination, that too after an in-depth study of the field. Your research must not be what is called a cut and paste job, where you can take bits and pieces of someone else's work and try and pass it off as your own. That is plagiarism. Plagiarism is a fraud and a serious criminal offense. In fact, it is an act of double fraud as it involves two issues. First, it is stealing someone else's work and then it involves lying about it afterwards. It used to be once said that copying from one source is plagiarism and copying from many is research. Don't believe it. Copying is what makes it an offense, whether from one source or many sources is immaterial. Most universities of any significance have strong protocols put in place to catch such unethical practices, so don't risk it. How do you get to know if your research work will break new ground and will fill a gap that exists in the knowledge basket on the subject? For this, you have to do a rough survey of literature and a critical observation of the field. Survey of literature or the reviewing of the literature relevant to a given field is a standard part of doing research, as this serves to put your work into the content of the larger discipline in which you are working. If you have chosen a popular or common subject, be sure you have to cover a lot of ground in the survey of literature itself to find what is new and you can add to the subject. Through a combination of the two, survey of literature and critical observation, you will fill the gap in the spectrum of knowledge. This will help you focus your thoughts and eventually draft a research question. According to Goddard and Malveli, answering unanswered questions or exploring that information or knowledge which currently does not exist is a research. The Advanced Learner's Dictionary of Current English lays down the meaning of research as a careful investigation or inquiry, especially through research for new facts in any branch of knowledge. Research is defined as a systematized effort to gain new knowledge. The trick in getting the answer to the research question often depends on the methodology used. Before going deeper into the critical issue of the research question, let us understand the nature of your study. Researches in mathematics and the sciences are about measurable quantities and are described by established units of measurements. They are repeatable and often play out in controlled settings of laboratories, for instance. But your field is dance. There is nothing measurable about the ananda derived. There are no units of ras, and it is hard to quantify the bend of the arm in the Tatta Adavu or how Bhangra spread beyond the borders on India. Thus, unlike sciences that are most often quantitative subjects, dance is in fact a qualitative one. As a non-notated art form, especially in India, it is ephemeral. Thus, it cannot be dissected as happens in zoology, botany and biology classes. Therefore, it is important that dance is studied through methods suitable to it. Once we have accepted that dance studies falls within the ambit of qualitative research, then safe it is to say that there are primarily two broad ways to study dance academically. One is the anthropological way and the other the choreological way. They are sometimes described as the European and the American ways. Admittedly, these are very sweeping generalizations, but in general it is noticed that the European researchers study dance and dance events in its own culture. The development of the European dance research is closely associated with the discipline of folklore and is also linked to the political concerns of the powers that had colonial aspirations. Thus, we find that some of the earliest non-textual studies about Indian dances are by foreigners who came to India, and in their vivid descriptions we find early ethnographic sketches. Some of these were dedicated by the diary keeping habits that wanted records of all things unusual seen in the course of the day, while in other cases it emerged from the desire to understand the native society that they had to govern. Another point to flag is that apart from this American and European binary, there may be other ways of adding prisms and lenses that may be more cultural specific and could therefore be treated as the third way of doing it. Do remember not to lose yourself in the upkeep of binaries. Instead of binaries or one over the other, any way is fine as long as it serves the end goal of answering the research question. Sometimes more than one method is necessary, and sometimes overlapping methods help nail the answer to the research question more firmly. So remember that really no method is better than the other when it comes to identifying research methodologies. You should be driven by what will help you create that matrix of data which will help you in answering your research question in the most robust manner as possible. Dance, dancing and dancers are usually subjects of qualitative research, but not always. Albert Einstein once said that not everything that can be counted counts, and all that can be counted may not count. This indicates the fact that both types of research, qualitative and quantitative, count. Before going on to point out the exception referred to the first sentence of the paragraph, let us understand what qualitative research amounts to. Qualitative research is a method of inquiry employed in many different academic disciplines especially in the social sciences. Qualitative research's traditional disciplinary roots are of anthropology, sociology and philosophy. Qualitative research is a strategy of systematically collecting, organizing and analyzing of data. Qualitative research uses inductive approaches, that means studying the issue ground up without having any a priori hypothesis or biases. It aims at generating novel insights into phenomena that is hard to measure quantitatively, as for example, most studies in dance. The goal is to understand in depth and develop a hypothesis. The setting is natural and not a controlled lab. Its tools are interviews, case studies, sample surveys, etc. A popular method of qualitative research is the case study, which examines in depth purposive samples rather than random sampling to better understand a phenomenon. It is important to understand that even Sigmund Freud conducted case studies, but his work was not seen as qualitative. Case studies were initially often based on smaller but focused samples rather than large samples, but with the coming of the computer and computer softwares, even that was sold as the computer made qualitative work have quantitative results. A focused sample, for example, was a set of the native informants that the initial ideologist and the originalist that the British used to understand Indian culture. The writings of William Jones on the ancient music traditions of India are an example of such Orientalist writings. Such writings offsets the image of India projected by writers like French cleric and scholar of Sanskrit J. A. Du Bois, who journeyed to and around India as a missionary in the late 18th and early 19th centuries and turned his decades of observations into what was for many years the definitive work on the subject of Hindu manners, customs and ceremonies, including a negative commentary of certain dance practices. Then there were the books written by dancers who came from foreign soils and made India their home as they learnt its beautiful dance forms. Prominent among them are Dances of India by Ragini Devi, the Kathakali complex performance and structure by Philip Zarelli, an excellent telling of the essentials of the practice of Kathakali. In 1999, he was to write Kathakali dance drama where gods and demons came to play, a far more political study that includes cases of controversial of Kathakali experiments and explores the implications on Kathakali of local politics of Kerala. The writings by the Indian scholars in the 20th century coincided with the growth of the Indian nationalism and served a different agenda of reclaiming the arts. Many such writings could not escape the Hindu-Muslim divide and the subtle attempts at linking the arts with a high caste status in the revival. Thus, high caste Hindu girls, often Brahmins, took to the newly structured version of Sadir, now called Bharatanatyam, while in the case of Kathak, the Muslim court phase was airbrushed out, especially as the Tawaiffs were seen as representatives of that degenerate form, while it was reinforced that Kathak was a Hindu temple art practiced by Brahmins. Had the scholars who pushed this agenda forgotten that the court dancers at Awadh were Bindadin Maharaj and Kalka Prasad, with the former being the dance teacher of Nawab Wajid Ali Shah himself. Immediately after independence, the researches on dance increased manyfold. It was the age of India discovering herself and the vast diversity and many localized forms not known outside the limited areas in which they have been practiced for centuries. As a little aside, I would like to mention that Jawaharlal Nehru's book, Discovery of India, captured the spirit of enthusiastic writing about India's diversity. It was converted to dance choreography. It was choreographed first by Shanti Bardhan in 1947 and a few years later, in the 1950s, it was again choreographed by Guru Acharya Parvati Kumar. Both presentations were produced by the Indian National Theatre. The slew of books written by Mohan Khokhar, Kapila Vatsyan and Sunil Kothari that followed pertain to discoveries of people who danced and understanding the dance better. For instance, these writings were about ritual dances of South India, Shaivism and Vaishnavism in Indian dance, or about people who were dancing for themselves, folk, tribal and ritual dances of India by Mohan Khokhar in 1987, types of dances arranged in neat boxes, Indian classical dance by Kapila Vatsyan, traditions of Indian folk dance again by Kapila Vatsyan, or the inconnectivities of various Indian arts, dance in Indian painting. Kothari took things a little more in depth with his one book per style model of writings on the different Indian classical dance art, and so he wrote for the art journal Mark with regularity. Special issue on Chow dances of India, special issue on Satriya dances of India, and produced at regular intervals books for the following books: Bharatanatyam, Indian classical dance art, Kathak, Indian classical dance art, Odissi, Indian classical dance art, Kuchipudi, Indian classical dance art, etc. Other writers who wrote in this discovery of the dances mode were Inakshi Bhavnani, who wrote the rather long-winded titled book, The Dance of India, The Origin, History and Foundation of the Art and Science of the Dance in India, Classical, Folk and Tribal, Indian Dances, Their History and Growth by Reginald Massey, Indian Ballet Dancing and Basic Concepts of Indian Dance, both by Projesh Banerjee. Even today, many publishers seek writings on the series of Indian classical dances, believing that they attract international buyers. But many of such books are no better than coffee table books and cannot be called scholarly studies, as they are merely descriptive and do not subscribe to any research methodology. Another type of writing on dance that can be seen from the period immediately following independence is the work on ancient Sanskrit and other language texts that are associated with dance. The most popular of them all has been the Natya Shastra. One of the earliest and most significant versions is Manmohan Ghosh. The entire debate of Shastra and Prayog, or text and practice, has been ongoing in Indian dance, as many of the dances boasted of detailed and elaborate text. Their study and finding linkages between the text and the practice caught the imagination of scholars for long. When the scholar came essentially from a practice background, often the prism was the practice. Dr. Padma Subramaniam's research on Karanas would fall in this category. In the late 1980s, questions of identity emerged, including issues of race, class, gender, and discursive communities, leading to research and writing becoming more reflexive. John Erdman came from the University of Chicago to India to research cultural policy and performing arts, producing a book on patrons and performers in Rajasthan, the subtle tradition. At this point, some of the more significant writing came from other fields. John was an anthropologist, for instance. Sociologist Amrit Srinivasan produced her extensively researched writings on the loss of the cultural property of the Devdasi. Simultaneously, eminent anthropologist Fredericu Apfel Marglin wrote Wives of the God King, the Rituals of the Devdasi of Puri, while Anne Mary Gaston wrote Bharatanatyam, From Temple to Theatre. Over a decade after her earlier work, which was Shiva in Dance, Myth and Iconography. Later, dance scholar and theorist Saskia Karsenboom Story wrote Nritya Sumangali, Devdasi tradition in South India. Throughout the 1990s in the field of research methodology, The concept of a passive observer researcher was rejected and qualitative research became more participatory and activist oriented. Soon researchers began to use mixed method approaches, indicating a shift in the original thinking of qualitative and quantitative methods as intrinsically incompatible. Many of the researches in the field of dance movement therapy fall into this category. For example, The Art and Science of Dance Movement Therapy, Life is Dance, edited by Sharon Chaiklin, Hilda Vengrover, or any writing using the Laban notation. However, this history is not apolitical, as this has ushered in a politics of evidence and what can count as scientific research in scholarship, which continues to be a current and ongoing debate in academia. Participant observation is another very important tool of research and is a common one in dance studies. The ways of participating and observing can vary widely. Participant observation is a strategy of reflexive learning and not limited to a single method of observing. It is in fact a continuum of a position between participation and observation. In the case of participation observation, the researchers typically become members of a culture, group or setting and adopt roles to conform to that setting. In doing so, the aim is for the researcher to gain a closer insight into the cultures, practices, motivations and emotions. It is argued that the researcher's ability to understand the experiences of the culture may be inhibited if they observe without participating. This counts for why so many performers who came to learn dance have written about it. Zarelli, Gaston, Kersenboom story are among some of them. Scholars like Richard Scanner, the Ramlila of Ramnagar and even Farley Richmond, the Satra people have worked very closely with the artistic communities they have studied. Some distinctive qualitative methods are the use of focus groups and key informant interviews. The goal of the sampling approach is breadth. Sample size is determined by the principle of theoretical saturation. Theoretical saturation is when no new data is being generated. In an in-depth interview, you do not know the path the interview will take. These interviews help us access individual understanding and are far more open-ended rather than structured surveys that are more reflective of qualitative methods. Question may not be directive but exploratory. It may have the main question and a probe to check if the main question has been understood, but one has to be careful that the questionnaire is not too long as to generate uni and yet not too short to not give enough knowledge and data. The script of the questionnaire can be changed depending on a lead that the interviewee gives. In conducting interviews, one may have to use interpreters in the case of language limitations. At times, one has to be careful in promising anonymity if the interviewee so desires it. One must also take care that the key informants are aware of what is the purpose of the interview. A positive and non-judgmental approach helps avoid doubts or anxieties on the part of the interviewer, who is therefore more forthcoming. Key informants, namely those who are close to the subject once identified, are truly representative and not sophisticated and elitist, for in that case it will be a class view and not a comprehensive view that they will project. The data once collected has to be interpreted and arranged for presentation. Various methodological procedures which may be applied in the study of dance, especially in the area of historical and systematic dance research, includes the use of historical, cultural, anthropological, sociological and ethno-choreographical methods. The spectrum and proportion of the methods to be used is determined by the research question. In the early part of this thesis module, we have discussed the research question briefly. Now we will dwell on it a little longer. A well-scoped research question defines the purpose of the research and determines appropriate methods to be employed. It will frame the way the study will be conducted and how the material that is generated will be analyzed and presented. In framing a research question, we need to be inducive and come without basis of hypothesis. It has to be framed as a question and it must be clear. Commonly, the verb is the first word of a research question: to describe, to understand. Basically, no assumptions but an exploration. It must describe a sample, setting and any other boundary that will make the study focused and manageable. Remember that a well-developed research question is essential to the success of the study.